Giving my pre-training camp 53-man roster projection, that and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this bonus episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media, covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers as deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. Here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message, no ads or anything like that. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So we are going to be going through the Buccaneers roster and giving my pre-training camp 53-man roster projection. We're going to get to defense and special teams, as well as some news regarding a former Buccaneer coming up in a little bit. But let's start on the offensive side of the ball first. Obviously, we have the easiest one at the top, and that is quarterback, where the Bucs are going to have Baker Mayfield, Kyle Trask, and John Wolford. Next up, I have running back with 4 players: Rachaad White, Bucky Irving, Chase Edmonds, and Sean Tucker. Then at wide receiver, I think the Buccaneers carry 6 of them: Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Jalen McMillan, Sterling Shepard, Trey Palmer, and Raheem Jarrett. Tight end, I think they're going to carry 4: Cade Otton, Ko Kieft, Payne Durham, and Devin Culp. Then offensive line, it's going to be 9 players: Tristan Wirfs, Ben Bredesen, Graham Barton, Cody Malk, Luke Gedicke, Robert Hainsey, Sua Opeta, Justin School, and Elijah Klein. So that's 26 players on the offensive side of the ball, which is more than half the roster when you include the specialists. This is why having offensive linemen that can play multiple positions is so important. You have Hainsey, School, and Klein that could all play multiple spots across the line, giving the Bucs depth all over without having to carry too many players. Here's where it gets tricky, though. And of course, this is pre-camp. So based on what we're seeing, what we're hearing throughout training camp, things could certainly change, but I could see the Bucs freeing up a couple of roster spots in a few different ways. If I'm looking at this kind of like a March Madness bracket, you know, when they're doing their bracket projections, you have the last 4 in and the first 4 out, and taking a look at teams that aren't going to make the cut or teams that get in based on conference terms, all that. Sean Tucker and Devin Culp jump out at me as potential chopping block guys that could be stashed on the practice squad as protected players. The Bucs will likely not be dipping into their 4th tight end or running back in any given game, barring any kind of, tragic injuries or anything like that. So those players can be protected on the practice squad while still developing and getting called up in the event of an injury. Tucker, no doubt, was a disappointment last season given the hype around him as an undrafted rookie free agent. He was dealing with injuries. He was projected to go in the draft, fell all the way through. The medical history was not great. The Bucs bring him in. Then because of injuries, he misses time in rookie minicamp, mandatory minicamp, missed some time in training camp, and just didn't become the player they quite thought he was going to be. And then you can look at Devin Culp, who was a late pick and had solid upside, but if the Bucs need to free up a roster spot in order to get an additional guy on the team, you could see Devin Culp as being one of those guys that gets stashed on the practice squad while he continues to develop and then gets called up later in the year. Now, those guys are certainly in the plans for the Buccaneers, but narrowing down the roster to 53 players means having to make some really, really tough decisions. Another name to kind of keep an eye on in that same vein is rookie Elijah Klein. He's a raw talent on the offensive line, and the Bucs could opt to place him on the practice squad in favor of someone like Brandon Walton, who has a little bit more experience to provide depth along that offensive line, especially early in the year. Obviously, this isn't going to be an even split between the offense and the defense, but I wanted to keep it as close as possible. So I was able to get 26 players on the offensive side of the ball, and that means I only get 24 on defense. But the Bucs are far more likely to use, say, 5 wide receivers in a game than they are 5 inside linebackers. So position plays a huge role in which players are kept on the 53-man, which players are going to have to be relegated to the practice squad, and which players just flat out aren't going to make the cut at all. And that brings me full circle back to my point about the offensive line. If you go through and take a look at them, there isn't a specific backup for every position, rather a small group that can play across the line at various positions, giving the Bucs a lot of depth with little player count. This has been a strategy for Jason Licht for a few years now, taking players that play tackle, moving them to guard or center, taking guards and moving them to center, giving a lot of cross training to allow the Buccaneers maximum flexibility across their line. So let's recap the offense real quick, and I'm gonna put it up for those of you watching on YouTube on the graphics so you can see the names right in front of you. Now, of course, I do have the backups italicized. If you're wondering why there's some regular, some italicized, those are what I'm considering the backups. So at quarterback, you have Baker Mayfield, Kyle Trask, John Wolford. At running back, Rachaad White, Bucky Irving, Chase Edmonds, Sean Tucker. Wide receiver, you have Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Jalen McMillan, Sterling Shepard, Trey Palmer, Raheem Jarrett. At tight end, Cade Otton, Keeft, Payne Durham, Devin Culp. Then along the offensive line, Tristan Wirfs, Ben Bredesen, Graham Barton, Cody Mauch, Luke Gedeke, Robert Hainsey, Sua Opeta, Justin School, and Elijah Klein. But again, remember, guys like Devin Culp, guys like Sean Tucker, Elijah Klein, they are kind of borderline and could very well end up on the practice squad in favor of some of these other players that have more experience. Maybe they're not as confident in their depth at certain positions, so they stash those guys. And of course, the Bucs can protect players from the practice squad each week. In that way, they're not at risk of losing them. Of course, the risk that they do take is having to cut them from the team in order to bring them back onto the practice squad. You see it every year, players that are cut, and then other teams scoop them up as they narrow down their 53-man roster, and they don't actually get to be able to place them back on the practice squad. But how about the defensive side of the ball? That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs have wound down, we get fewer games and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Right now, the Dodgers are the favorites to win the World Series at plus 320, while the Tampa Bay Rays are struggling a bit and sitting at plus 15,000. If you'd rather get in on some NFL or NHL odds early on, the Chiefs and the 49ers are tied atop the Super Bowl odds at plus 600, while the Bucs are at plus 5,500. Meanwhile, the Edmonton Oilers are the favorites to win next year's Stanley Cup at plus 850. The defending champion Panthers are at plus 950. And the Tampa Bay Lightning, because they're dumb and let Steven Stamkos go, are at plus 2,000. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listener of you every day. Everydayers, make sure you are coming back tomorrow. We are going to talk about Tristan Wirfs, among other things. Had a great question sent in that I feel needs addressing regarding Tristan Wirfs, so we're going to dive into that on Monday. In the meantime, if you want to hear the latest news from around all sports, the NBA, the NHL, NFL news, it happens year long, and we're ramping up to training camp. You got the MLB, you got the Olympics, you got the WNBA, but you want to hear more than just the national narratives, and you want the biggest stories without fake manufactured screaming. Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without the screaming. Locked On Sports Today is streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's turn the page to the defensive side of the ball and see where we land there. Remember, we've used 26 players already on the offensive side of the ball, looking at 24 players here on defense. On the defensive line, we have Logan Hall, Vita Vea, Kalijah Cansey, William Golston, Greg Gaines, and Mike Green. At edge rusher, we have Yaya Diaby, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, Anthony Nelson, Chris Braswell, and Randy Gregory. At inside linebacker, Levante David, KJ Britt, Servassier Dennis, JJ Russell. At corner, Jamel Dean, Zion McCollum, Christian Izien, Bryce Hall, Tyke Smith, and Tavier Thomas. Then at safety, Antoine Winfield Jr., Jordan Whitehead, Kayvon Merriweather. This was really, really tough. There are a couple of players that I wanted on this 53-man roster. Guys like Jose Ramirez, Markees Watts, Kalen DeLoach, Tyreek Funderburk. I just couldn't cut any of the other players to keep them on the roster. And I know the first thing that's going to jump out, maybe the second thing, is that I only have 3 safeties. But this is the same process that we had along the offensive line. Tyke Smith, Christian Izien, Zion McCollum have all played safety in some capacity and can move back there in an emergency situation, which is why the depth at corner is so important. If Zion has to move back to safety, you have Bryce Hall. If it's Christian Izien that moves back, you have Tyke Smith, or you have Tavier Thomas, or you can just slide Tyke Smith back and you can leave Zion at corner, and you can leave Christian Izien there at the nickel spot. Ultimate flexibility is huge, especially with as many injuries as we've seen across the secondary over the last few years. But then we're going to dive into the biggest wild card, and maybe this was the first thing that jumped out at you, and that's Randy Gregory. I have him penciled in here, but I have to say that he's the player I am least confident in as far as actually making the 53-man roster. He was the no-show at mandatory minicamp, and we have no idea whether or not he's actually going to play for the team. The Bucs could very well just cut their losses and move on from him and not have to deal with the drama that has already started to stir up. And it would only cost them $1.365 million in dead cap, while saving them just a little over $1.6 million in actual cap space. But what would the alternatives be? In the free agent market, there's not many. You've got Tyus Bowser, David Mayo, Marcus Golden, Anthony Barr. None of those really fit all that well into replacing Randy Gregory, but that's about it. You have, I believe it was Emmanuel Ogbah, who's going to work out for the Dolphins to potentially replace Shaquil Barrett. We'll talk about that coming up in a little bit. But you could get one of those guys for super cheap, and they may contribute about as much as Randy Gregory would have. But there's not a lot out there in terms of edge rushers for the Bucs to get at this stage in the game. Now, if Gregory doesn't make the team, or the Bucs decide to just move on, it's going to leave them a little thin at edge, which is already thin as far as depth is concerned. You have Jose Ramirez, who the Bucs are really, really high on. He dealt with a lot of injuries last year. You really didn't get to see much of him. You have Markees Watts, same thing. The Bucs are super, super high on Markees Watts. He had very limited opportunity last year. Then there's undrafted free agent Sean Peterson Jr. as an option. But I think at this point, we're trending in a direction where the Bucs may feel better off if they just cut their losses and move on from Gregory. I'm just personally not going to pull the trigger on that right now before training camp gets underway. And as I mentioned last week, there may be some extenuating circumstances that the Bucs and Gregory have not been able to speak about yet. If that's the case, that changes the entire landscape of what was going on with Gregory at the time. But this is a guy that the Bucs brought in to be a rotational piece, or at least they thought he was going to be a rotational piece and provide some depth. And with Randy Gregory on the team, obviously the depth is a little bit better. But if he's not on the team and you have to turn to Jose Ramirez, you have to turn to Markees Watts. Those are players that the Bucs are confident in that can come in and be impact players in that rotation. They're relying heavily on Yaya Diaby, and then hopefully a jump from Joe Tryon-Shoyinka and the impact from second-round rookie Chris Braswell. One spot in particular where I think the Bucs are really sitting pretty is at inside linebacker. Levante is going to be Levante, but Servassier Dennis and JJ Russell are both really good linebackers, and the Bucs are going to be really glad that they're on the roster if something were to happen to Levante or KJ Britt. To be fair to Levante, he has missed 7 games over the last 3 seasons after having missed only 7 games over his first 9 seasons. So the odds are he's going to miss some time. We hope not. We don't want to see Levante miss time because he is a special player. But that's just the way that things have been trending over the course of the last few years. We already know that Todd Bowles said that there's going to be plenty of opportunity for Dennis in certain packages. They already trust him and want him to be on the field more than he was as a rookie. And I think with him, you're looking at the future starting linebacker for the Buccaneers in the same way that KJ Britt kind of waited it out, waited for his opportunity, got the opportunity, made the most of it, and is now been named the starting linebacker to replace Devin White alongside Levante David. There's a lot to like about Servassier Dennis coming out of college, but there's a lot that still needs to be worked on at the NFL level. He is learning from one of the best in the game in Levante David, sitting behind him, learning, being able to pick his brain, see what he sees, evaluate film with him. So I think Servassier Dennis is going to have a much larger impact than he did last year, but he's still going to be looking at maybe 30 to 35% of the snaps, barring any major injury to either Levante or Britt. So to recap, let's go ahead and take a look once again. And again, the italicized players I have penciled in as the backups, but along the defensive line, we have Logan Hall, Vita Vea, Kalijah Cansey, William Golston, Greg Gaines, Mike Green. At edge rusher, Yaya Diaby, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, Anthony Nelson, Chris Braswell, Randy Gregory. Linebacker, Levante David, KJ Britt, Servassier Dennis, JJ Russell. At corner, Jamel Dean, Zion McCollum, Christian Izzian, Bryce Hall, Tyke Smith, Tavier Thomas. And at safety, Antoine Winfield Jr., Jordan Whitehead, and Kayvon Merriweather. That means that coming up next, we have specialists, the practice squad, and some news regarding a former Tampa Bay Buccaneer. That is next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. They help you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might just be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is also constantly looking for ways to make the process easier, like launching a new feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. There are 2.5 million small businesses that use LinkedIn for hiring, so don't miss out on your opportunity. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Wrapping things up here on a bonus episode of the Locked On Bucs podcast, talking about the pre-training camp 53-man roster prediction. And it's time to talk about specialists and how I think the practice squad is going to shape out. Among the easiest picks in this entire exercise are the specialists. The kicker is Chase McLaughlin. The punter is Jake Camarda. And the long snapper is Zach Triner. Boom. That's it. It's done. As for the practice squad, though, we have 16 spots. So here's what I have narrowed down for that. On offense, I'm going with wide receivers, Cephas Johnson III and Cody Thompson. Going with offensive linemen, Brandon Walton, Luke Haggard, Xavier Delgado, and Silas Zancy. Then at tight end, David Wells. On defense, I have defensive linemen Judge Culpepper, CJ Brewer, and Eric Banks. I have linebacker Kalen DeLoach, the undrafted free agent out of Florida State. Edge rushers Jose Ramirez and Markees Watts. Cornerbacks Tyreek Funderburk and Keenan Isaac. And then safety Rashad Wisdom. That's 16 players. And of course, some can be protected and likely would be players like Ramirez, Watts, and Walton. Then if they're called up to play in a regular season game, enough times they become part of the official roster, or they have to be released out for other teams to be able to scoop them up. This allows the Buccaneers to keep more depth at critical spots. We have seen a lot of injuries at receiver, offensive line, and in the secondary over the course of the last few years. So I made sure to keep some of my focus in those areas, but also included players that I thought could have made the 53-man roster, but I just couldn't find the room. As I mentioned, guys like Funderburk, DeLoach, Ramirez, Watts, all of them, I think have a legitimate shot at making the team, but I'm just not sure who was going to be sacrificed outside of Randy Gregory in order to make room for them. So, and just like I did with the other spots, I'm going to bring up a chart or a graphic for those of you watching on the YouTube to recap the specialists and the practice squad. Kicker is Chase McLaughlin. Punter is Jake Camarda. Long snapper, Zach Triner. And then the practice squad, wide receivers, Cephas Johnson III and Cody Thompson. Offensive linemen, Brandon Walton, Luke Haggard, Xavier Delgado, Silas Zancy. Tight end, David Wells. Defensive lineman, Judge Culpepper, CJ Brewer, and Eric Banks. Linebacker, Kalen DeLoach, who already turned a lot of eyeballs. Kalen DeLoach and Judge Culpepper are my two like super wild cards that could make this 53-man roster. You have edge rushers, Jose Ramirez, Markees Watts. Cornerbacks Tyreek Funderburk and Keenan Isaac, and then safety Rashad Wisdom. I am not going to be surprised or shocked if Jose Ramirez and or Markees Watts make the 53-man roster. I'm not going to be surprised if Brandon Walton makes the 53-man roster. Judge Culpepper and Kalen DeLoach, I think there would be a little bit of surprise, but those are names to certainly keep an eye out for throughout this entire process, because they absolutely have already started to make enough noise that they could wind up on the roster for week one. One final note before we go is that former Buccaneer star Shaquil Barrett announced his retirement on Saturday, saying he wanted to spend more time with his family. He announced it on Instagram saying, quote, "It's time for me to hang it up. It's been a great ride, and I appreciate everything that came with it over the years. I'm ready to shift my full focus to my wife and kids and helping them realize their dreams and catch them. Anyone who caught their dreams before knows the work, time, and consistency required to reach them. I'm ready to start building their skills up in my kids, which will take 100% commitment. I know to some it'll be a surprise, but I've been thinking about this for a while, and the decision has never been more clear than it is now." End quote. You could make the argument that Shaq Barrett is one of the top 5 all-time greatest signings in Buccaneers history. Of course, you have Tom Brady up there. You could make the argument for Rob Gronkowski. You have Simeon Rice, Brad Johnson, Hardy Nickerson, Michael Pittman. Those are some of the names that immediately come to my mind when I think of the best free agent signings in Buccaneers history. We all know that there's been plenty of misses. Those guys are without a doubt some of the biggest hits. You could throw in Leonard Fournette, even though it was for a short time. Playoff Lenny will forever live in infamy. But Shaq Barrett's impact on this team before and after the Super Bowl run, and of course his contribution during their Super Bowl run in 2020 is absolutely exceptional. He is the team's all-time single-season sack record holder, and coming from a Denver Broncos team that obviously didn't realize what they had when they let him walk away. Congratulations, Shaq Barrett, on your retirement. Thanks for the memories in Tampa. I hope you and your wife and your children have a wonderful time in your retirement, being able to spend all that time together. And hopefully you can help make your dreams, your kids' dreams come true the way that your own did. And a special shout out to Shaq for coming on this show. For you longtime everydayers, you remember right after Shaq Barrett signed his deal with the Buccaneers, we had him on this show, and he talked about the opportunity to get to start in Tampa and what he felt that he could do. And he lived up and exceeded everything that he said right here on this program. He's a wonderful guy. Really, truly one of the nicest people that I have ever had the opportunity to speak with in the NFL world. And we wish him nothing but the absolute best. Thank you all for joining this bonus episode, this 53-man roster prediction. Let me know in the comments where you think I got it wrong. Let me know some of these players that I left off the roster that you think will be on. Tell me who I have on the roster that you think isn't going to make it. You can drop those in the YouTube comments. You can tweet at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs. Insiders, go ahead and shoot me a text. Let me know where I got it wrong. Coming up on tomorrow's episode, we got a question from my buddy Mad Dog regarding Tristan Wirfs. We are going to kick things off this week with that. It's worth a conversation and something that I'm sure many of you are wondering. In the meantime, check out everything going on over at BucsNation.com. Make sure you are following on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs. Become a Locked On Bucs insider by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes. And of course, make sure you're subscribed on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.